Good morning, everyone. My topic is functional medicine, and I'd like to dedicate my talk to the late Wally Sampson. He was the first to write about functional medicine for the Science-Based Medicine blog. Before I start, I'd like to devote a few minutes to commemorating his life and accomplishments. He was a medical doctor and a professor emeritus of medicine at Stanford University. His specialty was oncology, the treatment of cancer, and he first got interested in alternative medicine because of Laetrile. Some of you may remember that. It was a bogus cancer cure made from apricot pits. And it had been tested and it had been shown not to work, but his patients were clamoring to try it. So he started looking into it, and he looked into other bogus cancer treatments. And then he branched out to investigate things like homeopathy and chiropractic and applied kinesiology. And he started speaking out against alternative medicine before the term was even coined. He had many accomplishments. He became an expert in analyzing all kinds of false medical claims. He was one of the founders of the National Council Against Health Fraud. He was a fellow of PsyCop, an active member of many other skeptical and scientific organizations. He founded and edited the Scientific Review of Alternative Medicine. He wrote articles and books. He appeared on television. He taught a skeptical course on alternative medicine at Stanford. He spoke at conferences. He testified in court, and he was often quoted in the media. He was one of the original 5 physicians who started the Science-Based Medicine blog. I've listed them in alphabetical order: Kimball Atwood, David Gorski, myself, Stephen Novella, and Wallace Sampson. He was our elder statesman and a role model and an inspiration to us all. He contributed to the blog regularly for a couple of years, and then he retired to emeritus status. And I'm particularly indebted to him. I never really got to know him very well, but he changed my life forever. I first met him at a Skeptic's Toolbox workshop in Oregon, where he was on the faculty. And he's the one who got me interested in looking into alternative medicine in the first place. And he's the one who persuaded me to try my hand at writing for the first time. I had emailed him to complain about a product called Vitamin O. It came in a bottle with a little dropper, and it was supposed to have oxygen in it. And supposedly by putting a couple of drops of this stuff on your food or your beverage, it would raise the oxygen level in your blood, which it couldn't really amount to much considering how much oxygen you're taking in through your lungs. But anyway, the catcher was there was no oxygen in it. They analyzed it in the lab and they found no oxygen at all. But the people who were selling this stuff said, oh, well, that's just because there's too much oxygen in it. There's so much that the instruments in the lab couldn't register it. Okay. And so they hired a medical anthropologist to do a clinical study showing that if you gave it to people, you could measure a change in the oxygen level in their blood. And it was the worst excuse of junk science I have ever seen. It was terrible. There was no way they could have gotten the results they did. It was physiologically impossible. I don't think they ever did the study at all. I think they just sat down with a paper and pencil and made up some data. But anyway, I complained to Wally about it, and he said, you know, nobody takes those studies seriously enough to critique them and show what's wrong with them. Why don't you write up a formal critique and I'll publish it in the Scientific Review of Alternative Medicine? And I said, who, me? I've never written anything for publication. I wouldn't know how to start. And he insisted and he encouraged me, and I wrote it up and he published it. But I got frustrated because when you write for a scientific journal, you have to be all formal and serious and you have to follow a specified format. And I thought this Vitamin O thing was just hilariously funny. So I wrote up a funny version of it called Oxygen is Good Even If It's Not There. And I got that published in Skeptical Inquirer, and my writing career took off. And Wally encouraged me by email through the early days of my writing. And I honestly think I would not be on this stage today if it weren't for Wally Sampson. He was kind, gentle, grandfatherly, professorial, approachable, modest, and a true gentleman. My younger daughter attended the Toolbox with me one year, and she met him, and she really liked him. And when we would see him being interviewed on television, she'd say, "Look, that's Grandpa Wally." He was that kind of guy. He died last May at the age of 85 from complications of heart surgery. He'd been married to his wife for 59 years, and they had 5 sons and 9 grandchildren. Now, Wally's gone, but his work in science and skepticism lives on. On the Science-Based Medicine blog and the Society for Science-Based Medicine, we're following in his footsteps and perpetuating his legacy. So thank you, Wally. Now on to my topic, functional medicine. First, what does functional mean in medicine? Well, I thought it meant a medical condition where the body is structurally normal, but where the way it's functioning results in symptoms. And a good example of that is irritable bowel syndrome. But that's not what they mean by functional medicine. So what is functional medicine? Well, I'm going to start with a short answer. IBTHOM, I-B-T-H-O-O-M, stands for it beats the hell out of me. It's practically impossible to define, and there seem to be as many descriptions of it as there are practitioners. It really means whatever the proponents want it to mean, like Humpty Dumpty. It amounts to an excuse for them to combine real medicine with imaginary medicine and make things up as they go along. Now, here's the guy who claims to have invented functional medicine, Jeffrey Bland. He's a PhD, not an MD. He founded the Institute for Functional Medicine, and he runs the Metagenics company, which has been in trouble with the FTC. They've sent the company letters asking them to stop making false claims for their products. And Mark Hyman is sort of like a poster boy for functional medicine. He's the chairman of the Institute for Functional Medicine, and he's also a medical advisor to Bill and Hillary Clinton. He's written a lot of books like Ultrabind, Ultrametabolism, The Blood Sugar Solution, and the Daniel Plan, which is a diet developed with the pastor Rick Warren that's based on biblical principles. He hawks supplements and detox cleanses. He says the law of thermodynamics doesn't apply in living, breathing, digesting systems, which was news to me. He relies on testimonial evidence. He says current medicine is as obsolete as bloodletting and phrenology. He's a germ theory denialist. He claims it's the terrain, not the germ, and he repeats the myth that Pasteur recanted germ theory on his deathbed, which he absolutely did not. But I want to be fair. I want to give these guys every chance to explain what they think functional medicine is. And here's their official definition from the Institute for Functional Medicine website. Functional medicine addresses the underlying causes of disease using a systems-oriented approach and engaging both patient and practitioner in a therapeutic partnership. It is an evolution in the practice of medicine that better addresses the healthcare needs of the 21st century. By shifting the traditional disease-centered focus of medical practice to a more patient-centered approach, functional medicine addresses the whole person, not just an isolated set of symptoms. Functional medicine practitioners spend time with their patients, listening to their histories, and looking at the interactions among genetic, environmental, and lifestyle factors that can influence long-term health and complex chronic disease. In this way, functional medicine supports the unique expression of health and vitality for each individual. Well, that all sounds very nice, but does it really define anything? It's mostly a lot of generalities, and couldn't you say most of those same things about good mainstream medicine? Wouldn't it make just as much sense if you replaced the words functional medicine with conventional medicine? Let's take a closer look. Addresses the underlying causes of disease. Well, conventional medicine does that. Think about it. If you have appendicitis, the doctor doesn't just treat your pain, he removes your appendix. If you have pneumonia, he doesn't just give you cough syrup, he tries to figure out what bacteria is causing the infection and give you an antibiotic. And I think it will become clear that conventional medicine addresses real underlying causes, while functional medicine often addresses hypothetical or imaginary ones. Systems-oriented means taking into account how different body systems interact with each other. For instance, how the nervous system affects the digestive system. And conventional medicine uses a systems-oriented approach when it's appropriate. But you don't need a systems-oriented approach for treating a broken bone. Functional medicine tries to extend the principle to cases where it doesn't really apply. Therapeutic partnership, well, every good doctor works in partnership with his patients. Better addresses healthcare needs. Well, modern medicine is constantly evolving to address those needs. There's no evidence that the functional medicine approach gets any better results, and I'll be coming back to that. Addresses the whole person. Well, good medicine has always done that. Back in 1926, Francis Peabody said that the secret of the care of the patient is in caring for the patient. Good doctors treat patients, not diseases. And the standard medical history even includes a whole section on social history that reminds doctors to consider everything from the patient's occupation and finances to his family and social support. Conventional medicine practitioners always spend time with their patients. They're listening to their histories because the history is 70% of the diagnostic process. And some functional medicine doctors do spend a lot more time with their patients, but much of that time is wasted. Real doctors can't always spend as much time with patients as they would like to, but if they had more time, they'd use it more productively than functional medicine does. And then looking at the interactions among all those factors, well, conventional medicine does exactly that. For instance, in diabetes, doctors consider things like the family history, diet, weight, environmental factors, smoking, blood pressure, stress, and exercise. So in the previous slide, I asked how functional medicine is different from good mainstream medicine, and I concluded that it really isn't. But I'll give them another chance to convince us. Here's their explanation of why they think functional medicine is different. Functional medicine involves understanding the origins, prevention, and treatment of complex chronic disease. Well, again, that's exactly what conventional medicine does. And they say the hallmarks of functional medicine, the functional medicine approach, include patient-centered care, and again, mainstream medicine is patient-centered. Looking upstream to consider the complex web of interactions. And what this really means is that they want to make up a story about what they think led to the illness, and that story may or may not be true. And number 3 is integrating best medical practices. Well, now we're getting somewhere. Functional medicine is just a kind of integrative medicine. They use alternative practices, botanicals, detoxification treatments, and the very word detoxification is a red flag for quackery. They say they're science-based, but their claim of integration with alternative medicine amounts to a declaration that they're using treatments that are not based on evidence. By definition, alternative medicine is medicine that isn't supported by good enough evidence to have earned it a place in conventional mainstream medicine. And they mention prevention, nutrition, diet, and exercise as if they had discovered those things. Well, obviously they didn't. Those things are already an essential part of conventional mainstream medicine. Now, you've probably heard what Mark Crislip has to say about integrative medicine, but it's worth saying again. If you integrate fantasy with reality, you do not instantiate reality. If you mix cow pie with apple pie, it does not make the cow pie taste better. It makes the apple pie worse. Now, integrative medicine is not a scientific concept. It's a marketing ploy designed to infiltrate quackery into real medicine. And here's why the functional medicine folks think we need functional medicine. The incidence of chronic disease is rising. Well, yes, and we're getting better at preventing and treating those diseases through science. We don't need anything more from functional medicine. 2, medicine is oriented to acute care. Well, acute care is perfectly appropriate for things like appendicitis and a broken leg, and functional medicine doesn't have anything to add there. 3, the acute care approach is inappropriate for chronic diseases. Well, duh. I mean, we know that. And conventional medicine does not have an acute care approach to chronic diseases. It's very concerned with prevention and with ongoing chronic care. 4, there's a huge gap between research and the way doctors practice. Well, the whole evidence-based medicine movement in conventional medicine is an attempt to narrow that gap. And functional medicine actually tends to increase that gap because they go beyond the evidence when the evidence is still preliminary and questionable. 5, most physicians are not adequately trained to assess the underlying causes and to treat with nutrition, diet, and exercise. Well, it was physicians who invented prevention, and they routinely give advice about diet and exercise. And functional medicine seems to think that diet can accomplish more than the evidence shows it can. And they haven't shown that they're any better at getting compliance with preventive medicine. Here's another explanation from a functional medicine doctor named Alex Rinehart. He says functional medicine is not focused on diagnosis. It sees health as a continuum. It uses unique testing and predictive advice. It identifies suboptimal function. It's a personalized lifestyle medicine that considers a dynamic balance of mind, body, and spirit, and it promotes organ reserve. He goes on to explain that functional medicine addresses these 7 core clinical imbalances: hormonal and neurotransmitter, oxidation reduction, detoxification and biotransformational, immune and inflammatory, digestive, absorptive, and gut microbiological, structural imbalances, and mind-body or body-mind imbalances. Well, how do you think those imbalances contribute to the development of diabetes or cancer? And how do you think they detect and correct all of those imbalances? And here's Mark Hyman's understanding of functional medicine as he explained it in a TED Talk. He says modern medicine is dysfunctional. Functional medicine is the opposite. Diseases don't exist. They are downstream symptoms of a mechanism. Functional medicine is a map to navigate through the mechanisms and patterns, not diseases. It's a disruptive technology that's going to overthrow the tyranny of the diagnosis. It's personalized medicine, the medicine of connectivity that asks why rather than what. And here's a pictorial explanation. Up at the top, functional medicine targets those chronic diseases like diabetes, cancer, and heart disease. And the underlying causes are a whole variety of different imbalances, along with toxic chemicals and toxic emotions. Now, which of those underlying causes and imbalances do you think are responsible for cancer? Do you think toxic emotions and detoxification imbalances cause diabetes? And here's the functional medicine tree. You won't be able to read this, but I'll break it down for you. The leaves of the tree represent symptoms, conventional diagnoses, organ systems, and medical specialties like cardiology and urology. The soil that the tree grows out of are sleep, exercise, nutrition, stress levels, relationships, and genetics. The roots of the tree are antecedents, triggers, mediators, mental, emotional, spiritual influences, genetic predisposition, experiences, attitudes, and beliefs. And the tree trunk is the fundamental organizing systems of assimilation, defense and repair, energy, biotransformation and elimination, communication, transport, and structural integrity. And here's another scheme that takes those 7 items from the tree trunk and puts them around a core of mental, emotional, and spiritual factors. And there are some concepts that are central to functional medicine thinking. One of those is organ reserve. Now, we know that our organs are not always working at peak capacity. The heart of a 20-year-old person is capable of pumping about 20 times what it needs just to keep the body alive. And we lose 1% of that reserve capacity every year as we age. And functional medicine people think if they can identify a decrease in reserve capacity, they can intervene to reverse it. And there's no evidence that functional medicine can prevent the natural losses of aging. They subscribe to a number of myths. One is that diet and lifestyle will prevent and treat most disease. And another is that normal isn't enough. We should aim to be better than normal. And this idea is epitomized in Mark Hyman's Ultra Wellness Center. They promise to make you better than well. They don't take insurance, and the initial consultation costs $1,800. And they claim to treat a number of non-diseases like systemic yeast infections and toxicity that requires detoxification, and adrenal fatigue and leaky gut syndrome. I found this astonishing statement on one of the functional medicine websites. High doses of fructose have been proven to literally punch holes in the intestinal lining, allowing nasty byproducts of toxic gut bacteria and partially digested food proteins to enter your bloodstream and trigger inflammation. I don't think so. And remember Jeffrey Bland, who invented functional medicine? He doesn't even mention most of the things I've just described. Doesn't mention anything on the tree. He says these are the 5 foundational principles of the functional medicine approach. Correct the precipitating factors, get rid of the sources of inflammation, manage the folate cycle, regulate stress hormones, and manage insulin and control blood sugar. Now, after all these different explanations of functional medicine, are you getting a clearer idea of what functional medicine is, or are you just getting more confused? Do you think functional medicine can actually accomplish all that it claims? Do you think there's any evidence that these vague principles lead to interventions that actually work to improve health and prevent chronic diseases? As Wally Sampson said, none of this functional medicine lays out a map from which one can get from here to there. They are claims cloaked in the language of science, but with the distinguishing characteristics of sectarianism, pluralities of approach to illness, absence of evidence for efficacy, a unifying concept of illness as a body out of sync with nature, with a capital N, undecipherable babble, and descriptive word salad. And various functional medicine providers tell us they have evidence for the therapeutic effects of all of these. Well, nutrition and exercise are not functional medicine, they're conventional medicine. And the evidence shows that detoxification is a myth and that acupuncture is nothing more than a theatrical placebo. And the evidence for the other things on this list is at best very weak, preliminary, and questionable. And by definition, they're alternative because they're not supported by good enough evidence to have earned them a place in mainstream medicine. And they readily admit that they don't have good evidence, but they explain that inconvenient fact away. They say, unfortunately, current research models do not have a way to test each individualized patient-centered therapeutic plan that is tailored to a person with a unique combination of existing conditions, genetic influences, environmental exposures, and lifestyle choices. Clinical trials have many inherent limitations which constrain their ability to inform clinical decision-making. Well, I have one word for that excuse: bullshit. It would be a simple matter to randomize patients into two groups and compare the outcomes with the functional medicine approach to the outcomes with the conventional approach. And to my knowledge, no such studies have ever been done. So none of this really tells us what actually happens in the functional medicine doctor's office. But they helpfully provide case reports online. And presumably, these are some of their best cases showing how effective functional medicine is. So let's look at a couple of those case reports. A woman with menopausal symptoms saw her conventional doctor. He didn't do any testing because he didn't think any tests were indicated. He gave her an estrogen for treatment, and it worked. But she was concerned about potential side effects. Now, she could have discussed those concerns with her doctor, and he could have reassured her based on the published evidence. But she didn't. Instead, she defected to a functional medicine doctor. He did an unreliable test called a women's hormone panel. He supposedly found an imbalance with too much estrogen and not enough progesterone. Now, keep in mind that she was taking estrogen. They got a compounding pharmacy to make up a mixture of bioidentical hormones personally designed for her. And she did well. She had no menopausal symptoms, but then she didn't have any menopausal symptoms when she was taking the hormone prescribed by her regular doctor. And she additionally reported a 54-pound weight loss, which was great, but obviously that didn't have anything to do with the change in hormones, and I'm sure her regular doctor wanted her to lose weight too. And she had increased energy. Well, I think most people who lost 54 pounds would notice increased energy. So far I'm not impressed, and I don't see where they did any of those things, those special things that they're supposed to do. Any non-functional medicine provider could just as easily have switched her to a bioidentical hormone, but most science-based doctors wouldn't have done that because there's no reason to think those natural bioidenticals work any better or any safer than prescription hormones, and they haven't been as well studied. Now, here is perhaps the best example of all. This is a case study that was published in an integrative medicine journal. It beautifully illustrates the functional medicine approach and the functional medicine misconception of what constitutes evidence. David Gorski wrote this up for the Science-Based Medicine blog, and it's a doozy. The patient was an 80-year-old woman with breast cancer, and she was treated with preoperative chemotherapy to reduce the size of the tumor, and then she had surgery. The surgery removed her cancer and gave her an excellent chance of survival. She was offered postoperative radiation as extra insurance to increase her chances of survival even more. She refused radiation, which probably didn't make a big difference. And she did well. 2 years later, there were no signs of recurrence, which is just what you would have expected. But the functional medicine doctors did a bunch of other stuff, and they tried to take the credit. They gave her intravenous vitamin C before, during, and after chemotherapy, a total of 97 infusions. They started with 25 grams and gradually increased to 75 grams. And the tolerable upper limit of vitamin C is 2 grams a day. So they were giving her toxic doses of vitamin C by an invasive intravenous method. Why vitamin C? Well, here's the reasons. They admit that the use of vitamin C therapy in cancer remains controversial, although some preliminary trials have shown it to be safe and potentially effective in improving quality of life and fatigue in patients with cancer. Now, I wonder if that's what they told the patient. I suspect not. In addition to the conventional medicines that her doctors were giving her for her high blood pressure, chronic gastritis, and thyroid disease, they gave her melatonin, digestive enzymes, probiotics, a medical food shake, vitamin D, EPA, DHA, wheat germ extract, oral vitamin C, in addition to the IV vitamin C, and a standardized herbal inflammation relief supplement, whatever the heck that is. They put her on a diet that was dairy-free and gluten-free and had a low glycemic index and adequate protein. And they had her exercise 10 minutes a day on a bicycle and attend Qigong classes. They put her on a sleep program, which consisted of instructions and a log to record sleep. And they recommended individual counseling, group support, and a part-time caregiver companion. Now, how did they decide to offer all these specific supplements and treatments? Well, to guide them, they did a whopping 154 lab tests, most of which I've never even heard of. And I've listed just a few examples. The CDSA panel tested for things like putrefactive single chain fatty acids, pancreatic elastase, lithocholic acid, and parasites. And then they did a Genova Nutraval panel, which consists of 140 tests. Now, in my opinion, the Genova lab is not to be tested. It's notorious for offering bogus tests. Their panel included things like urine representativeness index, lignoceric acid, and things that they thought were markers for tyrosine metabolism, malabsorption, bacterial dysbiosis, and 135 more tests. Now, in most cases, the results of these 154 tests were within the laboratory normal range. And if they weren't within that range, you wouldn't have any idea what it meant or what to do about it, how to correct them if they even needed to be corrected. And they claim that these tests were used in the management of this patient, but they don't offer any explanation of how. One finding was that the manganese level was slightly above the upper limit of normal. So friggin' what? And here's their conclusion. This case study highlights the potential benefits of integrative therapy in the co-management of patients with invasive ductal carcinoma of the breast. It does no such thing. It's nothing but an anecdote describing all the silly things that they were able to get away with. So this is what passes for treatment success and for publishable evidence in functional medicine. What a travesty. They didn't help this 80-year-old woman. They abused her and tortured her. She had to travel to the clinic 97 times for needle sticks and toxic amounts of vitamin C. Her diet was severely restricted, denying her the foods that she liked to eat. And she had to buy a lot of useless dietary supplements. And there's no reason to think that anything they did improved her outcome. And I think, how does this case illustrate what they claim to do? Remember the tree and all the things I covered? Did they look for the underlying cause of her cancer, or her high blood pressure, gastritis, or thyroid disease? Did they consider genetics in the environment? Did they correct the 7 core imbalances? Did they address Bland's 5 foundational principles? Did they use best evidence-based practices? I think it has become clear that they're not doing what they claim to be doing. From this and other cases described on their websites, this seems to be the process. First, they take an extensive history, and then they make up a narrative that links all kinds of elements from the history. And that narrative might be true, or it might be just as fictional as a just so story. And there's no way of knowing. They do all sorts of unconventional tests to diagnose non-existent problems. They modify the diet. They prescribe vitamins, supplements, and probiotics. And if that isn't working, they make up some different stuff, which they might just as well have been able to do from the start without all that theoretical crap about imbalances and principles. After extensively investigating functional medicine and writing 5 articles about it for Science-Based Medicine, Wally Sampson concluded, "I finally see what functional medicine is, a non-scientific, ineffective, jingoistic, cultic approach to dysfunctional somatoform non-disease conditions." Or to put it more succinctly, non-treatments for non-disease. David Gorski's conclusion was, what's good about functional medicine is not unique, and what's unique is not good. It takes making it up as you go along to a whole new level, and that's not a good thing in medicine. And one of our commenters on the Science-Based Medicine blog had this to say, "Their shtick about personalized medicine is made up from whole cloth. One size fits all when the doctor-patient relationship is that of the seer-sucker." And I'll end with my conclusion in the form of a picture. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words.